know somebody's voice before you ever see their face. That's the whole game for my next guest. Today, I'm sitting down with Lamarr Gulley, an Audie Award-winning Odyssey Honor, multi-earphones award-winning voice artist, actor, and producer who's been behind the mic for over 25 years. He's narrated audiobooks that have hit the New York Times bestseller list 5 times over, brought characters to life across dozens of titles, and lent his voice to documentaries and short films along the way. For over 2 decades, he built that career in the margins of a full-time career as a database administrator until it was strong enough to stand on its own, and he made the leap to pursue it full-time. But here's what makes this conversation different. I don't just know Lamarr's work, I know Lamarr. He's my brother in Christ, a member of my own church family, and today he's letting us in on what it really takes to build a career where your instrument is literally your voice. The discipline behind it, the reinvention it demands, and the faith that carries a person through 26 years in an industry that doesn't hand out guarantees. This is a conversation about range on the mic and in life. Hello, welcome to the Shattered Mindset Podcast, wisdom from life's turning points and defining moments. I'm your host, Melvin Larry. Let's get into it. Hey, my friend.
Hey, how's it going there,
How
sir?
are you?
All right. I love that introduction.
Good.
Yeah, that was spot on, by the way.
Spot on. I appreciate that.
When you said 26 years, I thought, wow, yeah, that is true. Because I started this thing, it's been, let's see, because I started this thing, my first audition was in 1998.
Wow, when you were like 5.
Right. Yeah. Make sure that's on video too, right? So it was my first audition for anything ever.
Oh, wow.
Right? I had never, I had done little things, school plays, church plays, and things like that, which I mean, they're not like little meaning meaningless, but, just, kind of more local things that you get just because, your mama, is the head usher or something like that, But so the first audition I ever had, it was in Virginia. It was at Regents University. I don't know if you remember like Pat Robertson and those.
I do.
So Virginia Beach. I lived there for about 10 years. Had no idea of any kind of etiquette or anything like that, right? I walk in and you have these serious actors, these people who had auditioned for stuff, and they're heads down, quiet, looking at their sides, which is the stuff they give you to audition is called your sides, right? So the little script. And so, they're sitting there reading, and I come in, like it's party time. I come in, hey, everybody, hey, how you doing, man?
Just being you.
Yo, what's up? Hey, they're all looking at me like, and one young lady looked at me and said, shh, and I was like, I'm sorry, and so I thought, oh, what's that? And I actually asked her, what's that you're reading there? I had no idea, y'all. And so finally I quieted down. I got the whole overall idea of what was happening. And so I got my sides quietly, and I auditioned. It was an animated feature for one of those after-school special type things, and it was going to be on ABC. And I notice I say "gonna be," so it's going to be on ABC, one of those after-school specials. It was about the Tuskegee Airmen and how a young black kid, gets kind of immersed literally into the book while his history teacher, which would have been me, is teaching the lesson. So he and the other kids kind of get literally sucked into the book, and it was a really good script. And so we were on the second. We got through like 1.5 table reads, and then all of a sudden I believe it was the producer came in. We were all around a table, and the director was there, and they were like, yeah, sorry, folks, the funding's been pulled.
That quick?
So that quick, yeah. It was like, I don't know what happened. I don't know what was going on. It seemed like it had a lot of steam. They were really, happy about it. And all of a sudden, and so everybody just kind of said, oh, okay. So we just, like, what do we do? So we just dropped, literally dropped our papers because this was still 1998. So, I dropped my papers. Everybody just kind of got up and left.
Wow.
And that was it. But then, I transitioned here to the Atlanta area in 2000. And I really didn't know, I was new to the area, didn't know really what to do to kind of generate, the learning that I needed. It was like, okay, I need to learn more about this. I was excited about it, but it was like building up because I really didn't do anything for that while.
So let me ask you something. Let me jump in here real
Sure.
quick, because before we get too far away from the beginning, I want to go back to the beginning, and I want to explore the beginning of the beginning.
Yeah, let's go.
Because you talked about that, being so new and so forth. But how did you get into that? What was the beginning of that? I mean, I don't know how old you were at that time, but just take us back to what brought you to that place.
That's a great question. So, I was always from the time I was a little kid, and it was funny because I was always, the smallest kid in the room, pretty much, me and a few other kids. But I always seemed to have this voice that was deeper than the other kids, or louder, or whatever. And it always seemed to kind of stand out. My teachers would always say, "Huh, man, you maybe you'll be an announcer when you grow up," or something like that. Or, they would always make that kind of a remark. When I was in music class and choir, my teacher, Mrs. Frances LaRue Howard.
Wow.
She's, one of those teachers that, makes a difference in your life. So you remember her. And so Mrs. Howard, she told me, she would always say, "Oh, we've got a baritone in here." And I was like literally in like the second, third grade. And she's calling me a baritone. So I'm like, okay. And I always thought, well, am I not singing the right notes or what's going on? So I didn't really know what that meant. So she told me, well, no, it just meant that your voice was deeper. And she was another one who always told me, yeah, maybe, you should do something with it. She even spoke with my parents, but I grew up in a union household, and it was like work, Akron, Ohio, rubber companies. We were just kind of being groomed to work in the rubber plant, not to become young entrepreneurs necessarily, but to go to work, hey, your dad, when he retires, you're going to step right in there, basically. And that's what we were being groomed to do. And so it was like, that was kind of one of those things where it was like a pipe dream, but it was one of those things that I never forgot, right? Encouragement from other people. So that's one thing that really people have to look at. It's like, when people are telling you that you have an attribute or you have something that is unusual or something like that, a lot of people may take that the wrong way and say, "Oh man, people are telling me I'm different," and they shrink away and they try to change that about themselves.
Yeah.
But I always look at it as like, maybe you ought to check that out. That's something different that makes you different and makes you stand out. Maybe you have a niche there. And so that's the way I thought about it.
Well, and I can see how sometimes people can be pushed into things. And while you had the voice change, and people's voices change at different stages in life, obviously yours changed early. But I can see how your voice may have taken you into the things that you're doing now. But did the persona of 4, 5, 6-year-old Lamarr match the voice?
Actually, I'll admit it did because my mom knew everybody. Marie Gulley knew everybody in town. So she was growing up, she was the pretty little girl in the neighborhood and, popular with the boys and all that stuff, but she was the little princess. And of course, my grandmother wasn't letting her do anything. But anyway, as a result of that, though, she was just popular throughout that little city. And so she worked in a downtown store, a little 5 and dime store. She worked at the soda fountain and, pretty much did anything they wanted her to do there. And so as a result, everybody's parents knew her. All of my friends' parents knew her, knew of her. They knew of her because they would go to the store with their parents.
Right.
And so what it was that my mom was always, as a result of that, she was always very outgoing.
Okay.
She would talk to everybody. She didn't meet any strangers. Whereas my dad, he was, like hard grizzled, working 2 shifts at Firestone, didn't really talk to you. He's an old Southern Alabama guy. He look, I'm all about making that money and work. And so I took more of that from my mother. I took the industrious side from my dad, and I took the personality side from my mother. And so as a result, I just kind of played off of that. So I was kind of, just as my voice kind of stood out, I really stood out. I was always a good student, always, the teachers. I always had a good relationship with my teachers. As I worked jobs coming up, I always had good working relationships because I, too, had a knack of just, the Bible says, hey, if you want to have friends, show yourself friendly.
Right.
And it's not like I was seeking out friendships, but because I was always, just being cool with folks, and I think that's really the golden rule Jesus was trying to teach everybody. Yeah. He was like, hey, love one another. He's just basically saying, look, just be cool and respectful towards folks, and don't be a jerk, and people will gravitate towards you and give you the benefit of the doubt in those jerky times sometimes.
Yeah, well, people gravitate towards you. You just have that kind of persona anyway. But when did you know that people, like we talk about, people can push you forward. But when did you know within yourself that you wanted to do something where you're involved in theater and all of those things as a kid and all of that?
Yeah. So as I mentioned earlier, so I was involved in choir and
right.
always, and then I sang in the choir at church, right? And so it was like, through that, people would ask me to, hey, will you make announcements? So I became familiar with microphone work. And I often tell my students as well, as I do coaching, voiceover coaching, I tell my students that's a good way to get experience if you're interested in doing something like this. Your church, your job in some cases, local, organizations. They need people to come and read things, read stories to kids, do announcements in church, work with your, like you were saying, you worked with your audiovisual, organization within your church. Do things like that and let them know you're interested in doing it. And as a result, I started doing things like that. And it just built confidence within me to the point where, I felt comfortable speaking in front of, crowds, right? And so when you're voice acting, when you're recording, especially when you're doing things like audiobooks, commercials, documentaries, things like that, that you're speaking to one. It's like the idea is that you're addressing one person. You're having a conversation with one person, but you're addressing the masses. So it's like it gives you that comfort level to kind of transition one into the other. And so, I just kind of built upon that.
So when did you know, I don't know whether it was as a teen or as an adult, adolescent, when did you know that this was a path that could lead to something long-term for you?
Well, I knew it was something I wanted to do at a very young age, probably at about maybe 12 years old, back at West Junior High School, I used to do a lot of They used to let us do announcements. They used to pick kids to do the morning announcements, stuff like that. So, it was like no problem for me. Other kids were nervous. I was like, this is cake, In fact, I like it, And so I knew it was something I wanted to do. But as far as doing it as like a career move, things like that, I felt I was ready. I felt I was ready, gosh, probably when I was in college, when I was maybe 18, 19 years old, but I didn't really see, once again, I hadn't wrapped my mind around how to make it into a career, how to monetize this thing. So I went to school, of course, and I'm like, I need to study something that's going to, be solid, make me some money. And, as far as that, and it did, studying IT and the transition there into database administration and IT consulting. Yes, it's been very successful. I made a lot of money out, doing that, I'll admit. But the thing is that there's one thing about, making money in a corporate, atmosphere and doing it yourself. So as far as making the transition into being, Lamarr Gulley voiceover or Voice Visions audio or my new baby, Loud Brown audio, you'll hear more about that.
Okay.
That's my podcast network, actually. But anyway, making the transition into that's probably have been about a 10-year journey when I did that. And then because it was just a matter of I started doing more to set myself down that road. I started saying, okay, well, instead of going and taking an IT course, I'm going to start taking some courses, some coaching in voice acting. I'm going to start working with some people who are well-known people as well.
So were you ever conflicted between your well-paying career and your dream and vision?
Oh, sure. Oh, yeah. There has been plenty of that because, you'll get that big contract, your voiceover contract. So, a lot of times, for those who don't know, like commercials and animation pay a lot of money. Those are probably, unless you're, like somebody like Tom Hanks or, somebody who's a well-known actor, who can get paid a lot of money for documentary and stuff like that, commercials and stuff like that, that's, a lot of money. So when you get that first commercial gig, you're thinking, all right. But, of course, as well, it's a business, it's competition.
Yeah.
There's a lot of other voices out there. You are not going to get every job. If you audition for 100 roles, you're not going to hear back from 90 of them. Yeah. That's just the ratio, right? Yeah. You may not hear back from 95 of them. You may not hear back from 99 of them. But that one, all you need is one, right? And so you get that one and you're like, great, but then you may not get a job for, a month or so or two, And so then that's where the conflict comes in because you're like, well, okay, maybe I shouldn't quit my day job, or whatever. But this is why, it's like that whole thing about, save, if you do have a corporate job and you're doing both of these things, like don't look at that as something to be condemned or, over. Well, gosh, I'm, still relying on my corporate job to do this or whatever. That's a good thing because you use that as a tool, right? You save money. You put that money away. You invest in your future because you have a dream. Invest in that dream. That dream isn't, somebody could hand you a check.
Yeah.
But there is no magic pixie dust that anybody, just, sprinkles over you and says, bam, now your dream is a reality. You got to work that dream. You got to do the things, you got to get the coaching. You have to get mentors. This man is a great mentor. You have to talk to people in the industry, networking. You don't have to be in everybody's face all the time, but you got to network. You got to talk to people. You got Joan Baker, who's another great friend, great voice actor. She told me, she's one of the people that's one of my mentors. She said, GTO, get out there.
I appreciate that. And, I have to wonder, though, it's kind of not easy to be aligned relationship-wise and so forth with either an entrepreneur or a visionary. And so I wonder, Jim Rohn would say something like work full-time on your job and part-time on your future. But I wonder, was it ever a hard sell for your family for you to say, I want to be a voice actor, I'm going to leave my job and do that?
Well, I mean, it was more for, okay, now I'm about to get emotional because I start talking about my great wife and daughter, okay, who have allowed me to the latitude and have encouraged me along the way to play make-believe, basically, to be in a booth, sequestered away from them, although I'm in the same house pretty much all the time when I'm doing this stuff, to be sequestered away from them in a booth. I always say, I spend hours by myself in a padded room talking to myself, for hours at a time, away from my family. And they, of course, it's not always great, but they encourage that because they know that that's my dream. They have never been like, man, Now, of course, there's the conflict has always been personal because it's like, you don't want to miss your kid growing up, of course. You don't want to miss those moments with your wife, and you don't want to miss those moments with your wife either, right? So you don't want to be messing stuff up here, you don't want to, so you definitely gotta make time. Time management is very important, and especially I've learned doing things like audiobooks, which are very time consuming. You really have to manage your time well, and then especially when you're working a full-time job, right? You really have to manage your time well because especially in the IT realm of things, there's going to be after-hours stuff. There's going to be emergencies. There are going to be things that you do have to juggle. But once again, it comes back to one thing you've talked about a lot in the past, time management, right? It's something that you really have to, like you said, your calendar, is important, right?
Yeah.
Your calendar, let your calendar kind of be that boss.
Yeah.
Make sure you get some organization. If you can't do it, then find some kind soul who will do it for you or help you with it. Hopefully, maybe you don't have to pay them, starting out, but maybe you'll be able to down the road. But these are things that you have to kind of do.
Right. And you didn't know you were going to be an Audie-winning voice actor. You call it locked away in a room, but it's also isolation. And in doing that, where did the discipline to do that come from? And was there ever a period when you allowed self-doubt to run in there and those limiting beliefs started to say, why am I doing this?
Oh, yeah, there's always that. I mean, heck, there's that every day, the self-doubt comes in, right? Because it's like something, you have an audio issue, your mic is not working right. You have a cable that,
that's my
goes
life.
wrong. Yeah, right. You may be hoarse one day. There's some kind of other issue. You really, there's always that doubt, right? But it's like it goes back to, first of all, goes back to, believing in God. So when you believe in God, you have a strong faith. That faith, then reflects upon yourself. Your faith in God reflects back down upon you. So the stronger faith I have in God, the stronger that faith I have in myself and my own abilities. It's just like a mirror. So that, it's like when the praises go up, the blessings come down, that faith goes out and it just bounces back to you. And so, and as far as the discipline, well, I grew up playing sports. I was in like a youth group drill team thing. It was kind of almost like a junior ROTC type thing. So it was like the discipline was there as far as, being able to like kind of regiment things, and, keep my practice together, getting in there, practicing, working behind that mic, getting comfortable with the software and with the techniques and all that stuff. But, even with all that, and I'm sure a lot of people can relate to that, there's going to be doubt. There are going to be little things that happen. You may get sick. I mean, heck, I had, cancer. I had to overcome back in 2021. There was a lot of doubt there because they didn't think that I would be able to speak again, like really. And I remember, I never will forget the next morning when I woke up in the hospital and they came in. They were like, "Mr. Gulley?" I was like, "Yes." They were like, "Oh, your voice is still there." I was like, "Yeah." I mean, because I told them beforehand. They were like, "Well, yeah, we know you're a voice actor, and you may not." I was like, "No, I am going to still be on the mic after this."
So that never hit your psyche?
That never really hit my psyche, so to speak, as far as like lessened the faith. I knew that no matter what, because it was this thing. Because I talked to Pastor Gregory and Pastor Trish about this as well. I remember Pastor Greg. He even told me, he was like, no matter what, you still going to have your voice. You're still going to be doing these things. Like, he spoke that over me.
Yeah.
And so I remember telling Pastor Trish that, look, I never had any doubt.
Right.
Like, there was never, I went in there knowing that I won this thing. Like, there was not going to be anything. And, there are still little complications. I have pains and stuff like that every now and again. But the thing is that I knew I was going to overcome all of that stuff. Even on my Instagram thing, I have overcomer, right? Because I knew that I was going to be able to overcome that. So, I mean, I really had no doubt. I didn't think negatively.
Right.
And I think that's really been, when you ask about all of the things in my life, my life has been really kind of a testament to the power of positive thinking, right? When I played basketball, I was the shortest guy out there, but I didn't care if you were 7 feet tall. I knew I was going to take you to the hoop.
See?
Whatever. I played football. I knew I could knock you on your butt. And it was just, and I did those things because of the fact that it was my mindset. And we look at here, this is what you're all about.
Yeah. I think about that, and I think about, like, when we have the tests, like you talked about the audio and all of that, and I thought that you probably had somebody spying on me and looking over my shoulder, because, man, all of those times where my stuff was just not working, I'm like, this worked yesterday.
Yeah.
I didn't do anything different. So why isn't it working today? This camera worked yesterday.
Oh, yeah.
Look, this camera worked 10 minutes ago. Why is it not?
Why is it not working out?
What is it?
And sometimes you have to take a time out. Sometimes you just have to go chill. You have to be like, okay, you know what? You gotta take like a woosah moment. And really, truthfully, and because that helps. I mean, I have had to, in some cases, stop.
Yeah.
And it would be late at night.
Yeah.
And I would get in my car. And this is why I tell you how great my wife is.
Yeah.
Right? It would be 10, 11 o'clock. And I'm like, baby, I got to go take a drive. And she knows, like, I'm not going, like, to see some other chick or, something like that.
Right.
I am going because I will
important.
go and drive. I have driven because we live, I-20, we live relatively close to Alabama. So I'll drive to Alabama, drive back.
I know where you live.
And come back and just kind of like do my thing, you
Yeah.
know. But sometimes you just have to blow it off. And like you said, but it doesn't take away from the overall. There will be bumps along the way. There's always detours, always things like that.
Yeah.
But I heard this last night at church, just like GPS, God will bring those things back to your point of destination.
But there's always two factors in that we deal with, and people can call them, the angel on the shoulder and the devil on the other shoulder. Yeah. But I'm learning more about referring to things in terms of signal and noise. And so there are things that are signals for us, and then there are things that are noise. And sometimes we can't hear the signal for the noise,
Yeah,
and even when we have the best of disciplines, which you obviously have strong disciplines, how do you push against the noise?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, I've always had good people in my life. I have mentors, guys like Roy Okelson. Okay, he's an Emmy Award winning producer, but he's also a great friend. He's been my mentor in this thing since I got started. Like, he was the one who really kind of helped me get on the right path, the serious path about this stuff back in about 2004, 2005. And so I have people I know I can call on, or I can message or DM or whatever, and they'll, give me good advice and say, oh man, that sounds like this. Okay, well, have you tried this? Have you tried that? To make me, or quite frankly, sometimes I'll just stop and say a prayer. I'll be like, okay, Holy Spirit, okay, you got to show me the right way to do this, because nobody's available right now.
Yeah.
So I need to see the right path to go down. But as far as, like you say, the signal and the noise, it's usually a thing where, that guidance, it goes back really truthfully to, and this is one thing I'm really strong on, I always tell my daughter about, get you a person, get you a mentor, get you a coach or something like that. I've had many great coaches, people who are, and here's the thing too, you don't always have to pay everybody, to do it. Just, kind of like be cool with folks, show people that you are ambitious, you're ready to put in the work, things like that. It's the way you comport yourself in a lot of cases that make people say, you know what? Yeah, that dude there, he might be about something here. I don't mind, helping him out a little bit. Or, yeah, she seems like she has something going on there. Yeah, let me try to pour a little bit in her life. Not that they want anything from you, but the idea is that, they see what you're doing and they want to help level you up a little bit,
Yeah.
And so, so it's really a combination of that thing. It's always, once again, I know, there's a lot of, people who have kind of like, dwelled away from like the spiritual side of business, but it's always that part though, right? And when you're by yourself, when you're an entrepreneur, you're self-employed, even especially when you're in a partnership or whatever, like you got to have something at like something at the head of that, and it's got to be like your faith has got to be strong, because there's going to be those things. You're always going to have that point, every little logic point where you got to say, do I do this or do I do that? And then, like you said, there's that sign or is that noise, and which way am I going to go? Sometimes you might follow the noise, right?
Yeah.
I mean, because sometimes that noise is loud.
It's loud.
And you come to a dead end, you're like, oh man, I should have followed. That wasn't the sign. But even with that though, that because you have faith, because you have belief in yourself, you can always turn around. I mean, you look at guys like David, you look at guys like Abraham.
Yeah.
Abraham had to turn around. He had to walk until God told him to stop walking.
Yeah.
Things like that. So you really have to kind of know, if you have that strength and that relationship and that faith in yourself, that you can kind of turn around and do those things. You have to have the faith that you can do that, I guess.
Right. You got we've not talked a lot about your business and career background and everything, and working with the SQL and the IT side of everything. It was really stable, technical side of what you do, and you're building databases and all of the things that it takes to do that. When did you know that? Two questions. One is, when did you know that you were secure enough in what you were doing outside of your career to know when you could walk away? And what did you take from the structure of the corporate side? What did you take from that to help you in what you're doing?
Oh, great questions. Okay, well, I'll take, let me see. So I'll take the second one first. So what I learned was, it's basically that. It's structure, right? So corporate structure, one thing I've always done, as an actor, every actor, you have to be observant. You have to observe people, situations, stuff around you. And so that's what I've always done. I've always been like, that's a good idea. Okay, I see how they're kind of like building that brand, or they're building a team, or how this manager kind of takes charge of things, and little ideas that they use to bring people together to work in one direction, things like that. Once again, learning from other people. You don't always, have to have somebody as an official mentor to be mentored by somebody. You don't always have to have a, book to read to learn from, you learn from the book of people sometimes,
I like that.
and so that's the thing. It's like, everybody can be an open book for you to read if you're willing to open your mind enough to open that book. So I've learned things from you, from your wife. I've learned things from people all over, but one thing as far as that corporate thing, that corporate structure, and you learn some things not to do, as well. So you learn how to incorporate that into your business and see how those things work. And then as far as the first question, and that's the thing as well. And I was just the thing about the decision points I was talking about earlier.
Yeah.
Logic. You learn that when you're building, anything that revolves around IT first starts with logic. And it's kind of like life. Life is a flow chart. Logic is a flow chart. You start, and then every decision you say, okay, it's morning. Do I want to get out of bed?
Mm-hmm.
Yes. Okay. What do I want to do next? No. Okay. So if it's no, then do I want to turn on the TV, or do I want to roll over and go back to sleep? Mm-hmm. Yes. No. So everything is a decision point, and all of your decisions blossom from there, or they sink from there. Mm. So you have to really, look at it. So that's what I've learned. I've learned, okay, especially from the technical side of voice acting and audio and video and stuff like that. Everything has its process. And, you can write these processes down, you can keep them in your head, but as long as you follow that process, that consistent and persistent process, then you're normally going to have success more than not.
So when you talk about technical side and process, I have to think about, as an actor, whether it's voice acting or stage acting or whatever, you have gone from a youthful side, urban, to a Southern gentleman and everything in between. How do you find the right voice and make it feel true to you?
Well, yeah, that's a great question. So the thing is that now I'm kind of different from that aspect in that, like, there are people have different, once again, it goes back to the process, right? People have different processes. You have some people who, when they're working an audiobook, especially if the audiobook has a lot of characters, they will make a spreadsheet or kind of a library of voices, and that helps because sometimes you have a character that may appear on page 3, but may not appear again until page 103, right? So by the time you get there, you're like, oh, how does little Johnny Joe sound again? So you have something to reference, right?
Right.
Now with me, I don't do that because I remember how Johnny Joe sounded, because here's the thing. I go back to that observation thing I was talking about earlier. The characters that I do, when I do characters, are already alive in me. I had the privilege of, I've done a lot of, for example, historical recounts, like documentary stuff, Black history, stuff like that. And in a lot of cases that calls for, voices that would fit a certain time frame or era, slavery times, Southern, rural Black people.
Right.
Who, sometimes, they don't speak the Queen's English, or whatever. But I had the benefit of growing up around my dad, who was the old Southern fried Alabama guy, his parents, his aunts and uncles, meaning his dad's brothers and sisters, his brothers and sisters. So I got a lot of a great feel for who those people were while growing up as a northern Midwestern kid, right? Still speaking like this, but I can still pull out a voice here and there, that's living in my head. And then as well, with kids, even with kids, I can. Is just from what I've experienced. And I don't know what it is, the observation skills when I hear a voice and it sounds, and I'm always listening for voices, y'all. So I may cast you, if I hear you, I may ask you to come audition, but I'm always listening for voices that sound interesting. And so but that voice will get inside of me and it kind of channels out. And it's not a thing where I have to really think of this voice. When I'm reading it, I hear that voice that makes sense while I'm reading that script.
So, okay, I'm sort of with you and I'm sort of not.
Okay.
Because I get the part where you say it's already inside of you. And I can appreciate that because I can appreciate you relating to the experiences of those voices.
Yeah.
But what I'm still... you need to help me with, because if you're reading an audio book and the character is a 10-year-old girl, your voice is nowhere close.
Yeah. No, right. Exactly. That's a great question. So when you're doing these characters, in most cases, in an audio book, you are not going to, now if you can modulate your voice up to a 10-year-old girl or whatever, that's fine. But in a lot of cases, you do childlike characteristics, right? So, you change the tone, you modulate a little bit, and then you just listen, because everybody's got a little niece or a little whatever, or you remember when you were growing up and how kids sounded in the neighborhood or what have you. At least that's where that's how I do it, right? And so and once again, it's observation. I observe little kids. I love little kids. And so I observe little kids. I listen to how, they're talking and, they have their little characteristics and, stuff like that, right? And so you kind of lift that, give your voice a little bit of a lilt, but it's more of the characteristics that makes it sound like a kid. So because kids, in a lot of cases, when they're saying things, it's like their cadence and their tone. It's kind of flat, things like that. And so it's always fun doing kids. So that's really how you work that. Now, there's some people in this industry who can, really lift their voices up like that. But because, like you said, I got deep voice. I can't do that. Yeah. But what I can do, I can portray that kid and relay the feel of that 10-year-old girl and make you kind of think, oh, okay, yeah, that works.
What have you learned about Lamarr from doing what you do?
Well, I have learned that Lamarr is sometimes silly, sometimes serious. And Lamarr doesn't mind, being Lamarr. In other words, Lamarr doesn't mind is okay being with himself.
Is that something that you had to grasp? Is that something that was not there before?
It was one of those things where it wasn't a difficult thing, but it was a transition because I was always used to working with teams, right? But when you're working by yourself, and I discovered as well that another thing, and this is something that you got to discover as an entrepreneur, that I can do more than what I thought I could do previously. Like I can juggle different, balls in the air. I can be a businessman, and make deals while recording this audio book, while, sending out, 7 auditions, while doing these things all in the same day if I need to, know. But I also learned that there are some days I need to just chill and not do anything.
So what do you think that people in the middle of life now, maybe they may be 40, 50, 35, and all of that. And they're going through, those are the times when we start transitioning in a lot of ways.
Right.
What do you think that what you have done and what you're doing tells you, or what message does it give you to give to people who are going through transitions in life?
That's a great question. First of all, I would say it's never too late. Never too late, right? Never too late. Today is the youngest you're ever gonna be from here on, so you may as well start now, right? So here's the thing. I started really like in earnest working as a voice actor at about 35. Because all these people, it is so funny because, I think about back when I was younger and we used to think, ooh, 30. Oh man, you're 30. That is so old, oh my gosh. Ooh, 40. Oh my gosh, it's ancient. But, so it's never too late. You're never too old to get started. If you want to get started doing something, like do it now. Now if you're going to play like professional football or something like that, well, you might want to turn the page. If you're 50, you may want to turn the page away from that. But the thing is that it's never too late. I won my the Audie Award in 2023. I was 50. Oh gosh, 53 years old, right? When I won that Audie Award. And here's the thing: is that when I found out I won it, I was looking for my other people, the likely suspects, my friends in the industry, so I could, I was looking at the nominations that year, and I was like, okay, well, who do I have to congratulate this year? Blah, blah. And I was like, wait, that's my name, right?
Oh.
So the thing was, it kind of goes back to the other thing with, being cool with people, networking with folks. But anyway, if that's the number one thing, if nothing else is that, it's never too late, to follow your dreams. Go ahead, go for it. If you have the faith, it is attainable. If you're willing to put in the work, it is attainable. If you're willing to say, okay, maybe I don't know how to do this, recognize that you can learn, even at an advanced age. You can learn how to do this. You're not, you don't have that many cobwebs up there where you can't, learn new things,
Yeah, I thought it was interesting that you walked away from a stable career at a time in your life where most people would be saying, hey, I better hold on to this right now because I'm getting to that place where I may need to fall back on this. And you walked away.
Yeah.
But you talked about the voice acting at 35, but we've talked about you starting to get into the industry many years before that. And it may be confusing to some people because we started out about at an early age your voice.
Right.
But you didn't get into voice acting until 35. What was happening in between 5 and 35?
Well, I think there was just a lot of confidence building, first of all, and a lot of people, pouring into me. You really, you don't build, something by yourself. You're always going to have somebody holding something for you or helping you hammer something or screw something in or what have you. Invariably, you're going to need some help, and I had to recognize that. So between that time, and like I said, I got my first audition, my really first job when I was, 1998. So that was like, back then. But between that time and the other time, like I didn't go to school for, I didn't do anything audio related. I didn't, study journalism or anything like that. But I just continued to kind of know that, I don't know, it was always in the back of my mind that this was what I was going to end up doing. I didn't know how, I didn't know when, I didn't know where, but I just continued to water that, that flower, that big giant, sunflower of belief.
Yeah.
Basically.
Speaking of beliefs, we do have the beliefs and they take us a long way. But we also have limiting beliefs,
Yes.
and those limiting beliefs can hinder our process and our progress. What are some some limiting beliefs that you had to overcome?
Well, I mean, from an early age, was always first it was, location. I'm just a kid from Akron, little small little town, right? And then it was now there were beliefs like I was saying before. Grew up in a hardworking union blue collar household, and there wasn't no you're going to be an actor. You're going to be no, 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 no. You're going to go and work in somebody's factory in Northeast Ohio, blue collar,
Yeah.
area, union household, and you're gonna work a machine, or you're gonna do something like that, because that's how my family, and just of course we all being black, we all kind of have this similar history as your family being part of one of the great migrations to the north. My dad was literally born in a sharecropper's shack. His parents were sharecroppers. He had a 7th grade education. He was, they brought him and my uncle home to work the fields. So, work was always a primary thing in our household, right? We worked, did yard work, whatever. So work, work, work. And it was always had to be something with your hands, tangible, something, that was what was tangible, was something you worked with your hands, right? And so I was always taught, no, you don't do that. No, I was going to be in the performing arts thing at school, right? The program at school. No, you can't do that. Go ahead, study, something else. Something's gonna get you a real job, right? And so those were always the thoughts, and that always echoed in the back of my mind. Is this a real job? Gosh, okay, now I'm gonna get married. Okay, can I, raise a family, with something that's kind of not really like solid everyday work, because because of course. And this being in business for yourself, you're not getting paid on, you don't get a check every 2 weeks. You'll get a check every week, every month or whatever.
Right.
You get a check when you work, when you finish that job. And so it's not really stable. And so those things always were in the back of my mind. So as I got to different points in life, there was always that thing, but yeah, you got to have that stable income. You got to, and so finally, through wisdom and saving money, things like that to fund my dream, I got to the point where I didn't rely so much on the income from my job. I could transition over more and do more stuff, go to more conferences, hire some coaching, do things like that. And it started to feed, things later on. But that was always the thing in the back of my mind from 5 to 35 was, you got to get a real job. You got to, you got to keep that job,
So, you've done a variety of some things and at different levels. And I mean, how do you go from things like a book like White Man's Law to something that's pure for kids? And I mean, listen, that's a transition. How do you not get lost in the stuff?
Oh, it was. Now, the good thing was they didn't happen one right after the other. So that was good because, after White Man's Law, that was, gosh, I forget what year that was. So I did a series of books. One was called White Man's Law. The other one was called African Founders, right? African Founders was this really long, 25-hour epic, right? And the guy who wrote it actually won a Pulitzer for another book. And this was this thing was on the cover of Time magazine. It was all over the place. I didn't know, I had no idea. They just sent me the script.
Wow.
And I was like, oh, okay, sure. Why not?
Didn't know how big it was.
I did not know how big this thing was. But then of course there was White Man's Law. And so White Man's Law is all about, the history of, it's about the history they don't tell you about, in school, right? About, the history of racism in the United States. It was written by a white man, so I don't want emails. So anyway, it was written by a white man. This guy was great. He's a professor at I think like Brandeis or something. But the thing is that that was really heavy, man. I mean, I had literally had to take breaks and there were parts of that book that had me in tears. I mean, literally, there was this one scene where they talked about they hung this black woman and they they had just, hung her husband. She came out there crying. They grabbed her. She was pregnant. They sliced her open. The baby drops on the ground. They stomp on the. I was like, oh my gosh. That was one thing I had to stop, and I was like, oh my gosh.
Wow.
Yeah, I couldn't believe that, and this was just like in Florida, the 1930s. Like within the past 100 years.
Yeah.
And, things like that. So you really gotta, now. The good thing was, like I said, these weren't between that and let's see something like Stunt Boy in the Meantime. That's what we won the Audie Award for.
Okay.
And so those were about a year apart from each other. And so Stunt Boy in the Meantime was, of course, Jason Reynolds' book. Jason Reynolds is just, this great writer. And he makes these characters live for you with, he gets great illustrators to do these illustrations. And you get a chance to look at these illustrations and you're like, okay, I can have fun with this. So I did several characters and they wanted me, Simon & Schuster, they wanted me to kind of go over the top with some of these characters. And I went there, and it was just a lot of fun. So it was, the good thing was, because had those books been one right after the other, I would have had to take a break after that because it was really, like you said, that was really a heavy read, White Men's Law. It's a good read. It's a good listen. But the thing is that get ready to be slapped in the face by some unsavory facts, maybe some stuff that you didn't want to hear.
And you probably, I would imagine that there are times when you have read books where you found yourself in the book.
Yeah. Oh yeah. I mean, gosh, there was a book. Well, there was a book. Gosh, I forget the author, but anyway, he wrote about his time. There was a couple of books. There was one I did early on. It was about, I think it was the third or fourth book I ever did, and this guy wrote about his upbringing in Alabama. And he's kind of a contemporary of mine. He's about the same age as I am. And he talked about some things about how, the little boy moving in next door. And he wanted, he was, they were, mean mugging each other because he's like, this is my neighborhood,
Yeah.
Next thing you know, they become great friends because the little boy had this fire truck that he just had to play with, And I remember those times, I had a little buddy that across the street, boy, and he and I used to slug it out. And then 5 minutes later, we were best friends again, that type of thing. So it was, it's that kind of thing to where, and it just makes you smile. I love books like that just are really, nostalgic and things. But I also love, books like, White Men's Law and African Founders because it's educational. I think that especially now when, with all the book banning and all that kind of stuff there.
Yeah.
Well, the audio books, they're there. This stuff's in the Library of Congress.
Yeah.
It is, it is there on audio. Somebody's always going to have it available there. So whether you want to listen to me or not, you'll have the education.
How many audio books have you read?
I have done close to 40 books now.
Oh, that's a lot.
Which is really, I got friends who've done 400 plus books.
Oh, that's a lot.
But still, I mean, I it's a good balance with everything else that I'm doing. It'll probably really, there will be a lot more added now since my time is more freed up now. But it's a time consuming process, right?
Well, it's 40 books more than I have.
Yeah. Well, look, but you'll be there. Yes, we'll make sure of that. Especially when you write your book.
You keep telling me about that, but and I'm working on that too. You talked about the Audie. Tell us really quickly what the Audie is. We hear about that,
Mm-hmm.
and then just tell me what did it feel like after everything you've gone through. What did it feel like getting that award?
Okay, so the Audie Award is like the Academy Awards of, of audiobook production and narration. So just to give you an idea, that same night I won, Viola Davis also won an Audie. It is awarded by the Audio Publishers Association, which is kind of like the authority for audiobooks. And it is a very prestigious award. It's like I said, it's like Emmy, Grammy, the whole thing. We go. It's a very swanky event that's held every year in New York. We had the year that I went. We had comedian Michelle Buteau. She was the host, and so that was a lot of fun. We got a chance to put on our, put on our tuxedos and all that stuff. Even got a Getty image, but out of it. But the thing is that so the Audie Awards, that's what that is. It's really excellence in audiobook narration, performance, and production. Has a lot of different categories, just like the Academy Awards. After I received, so that night, so like I said, initially I had no idea, we were even nominated for it, But the thing is that the book that we did, just the book that itself, and then they incorporated the audiobook into it. So Simon & Schuster created a whole curriculum, educational curriculum out of it, right? So, they sent T-shirts and Stunt Boy had capes and wristbands and stuff. They sent all that stuff, packages to schools around the country with the book to build curriculums on, because it's all about childhood anxiety. That's what the book is about. And so they wanted to talk about that. So it was just this big deal, just took off. So finally, we get to the Audies, which we had no idea we were going to win. So I said, well, I guess we better get tux and get some tickets to go up to New York.
See?
And the thing is, too, the night of the Audies was also the night of my wedding anniversary, so that worked out fine. So we're in New York. And then we win this. So we're going up. We hear our names announced. And we went up against Neil. I forget the guy. Anyway, there's this book, Coraline. I don't know if it's a really popular kids thing, Coraline. And so the guy who wrote it, he's a very popular guy as well. But anyway, so we thought, oh, well, man, Coraline is there. Coraline is a monster. We were not beating Coraline. So anyway, when they announced us winning, my daughter has a video still out on Facebook. I jumped up like, all right, yeah, and everybody's jumping around and everything. And it was just an amazing feeling, being in New York on my wedding anniversary and then winning that award. It was kind of validating. It kind of and then to have a couple of the judges come up and tell me, because I played like about 9 characters in the book, and tell me that no, they were like, oh, you guys you did a great job, and I was like, oh, thanks, we did it. She was like, no, you really did. I thought, man, that is great.
Wow.
The fact that they came and wanted to tell me that
kind of validation.
It really was. It really was. Yeah. And so I really, it was an unbelievable honor and experience. I was able to take my daughter, to have her, see me, win this award. It was just so amazing. But with anything else, though, and you see this with the people winning Oscars all the time. It's like 15 minutes later, nobody cares. It's like
the Oscar curse.
Yeah. It's like, well, it's not so much that. It's like the thing is like it's great to have on your resume because it gets you get you a second look. But once again, it comes back to you're still an actor. You still got to perform.
So was it getting the award or something else, something quieter, something different that spoke to you at any point in time that said, Lamarr, you made it in this business?
Well, I actually, so before that, I think it was before, right there, that was more validation. But what told me that I was doing something to kind of like, be part of this thing was really kind of like when the big 5 publishers started contacting me for, auditions, or they wouldn't even ask me to audition. They would just say, "Hey man, I got this script. Boom, there it is. I need you to read this." And I'm like, that in itself to me is validation, because it shows me that, and this is one thing that I stand on. I am honored by the fact that somebody trusted me with their stuff enough just to say, "Hey man, do it."
Yeah.
They don't need to hear an audition. They know your audio quality is good. They know that your performance is going to be on point. They trust your process. They know you're going to meet that deadline. They trust your process. Right there, that's the real honor for me. I can get awards and all that stuff and everything, and they're great. It's an honor. I got that thing hanging on my wall. You better believe it.
Yeah.
And I tell everybody, yes, I won an Audie Award. It was great. But the thing is that once again, when it comes down to it, you still got to perform. You still got to do business. You still got to, work your contacts. You still got to network and negotiate and things like that. And, if you don't, there are plenty of resources, online as far as like business and stuff like that. When you're a performer, I always tell my students as well, that I coach, it's show business, but it's your business.
Yeah.
You got to work it.
I think about that when I think about maybe, and I don't know if I'm thinking about it in the right context, but I think about maybe like a casting director or something like that. And when a person is thinking, who is right for this, and they say, Lamarr Gulley would be right for that. They recognize who you are, and they recognize your skills and your talents, and your name comes to mind when they're thinking of a project. I think that's making it.
Yeah, exactly. And that's where that started coming into play, right?
Yeah.
I mean, and that's where, like I said, once again, I go back, and I sound like a broken record. Networking, getting out there and getting to know people, going to, going to industry events in the industry that you're, if you're interested in doing something, meet some people who have done it, and you don't have to try to be them, but, take little bits and pieces.
Yeah. Well, you've done this a lot, and you're very strongly credentialed in what you do, to the point where you're helping others and coaching others, which is phenomenal when you can pour out of yourself into someone else. What is one of the top things that maybe people who are looking at doing what you do, what's maybe one of the top things they get wrong?
Well, the biggest misconception, especially when it comes to audiobooks, is that you're just reading a book, right? You're just, hey, it's just reading books.
Read aloud.
How hard can it be, right? So I tell people, I'm like, okay, I want you to take your favorite book. It could be the Bible, whatever it is. Your favorite book, go sit in a closet by yourself or in a enclosed room, and open that book and read it out loud for an hour straight. And then tell me what you think after that, right? Because you're not just reading, it's acting, because because here's the thing, audiobook narration, you're everything. You don't have the benefit of pretty pictures. There may be a sound effect or two, but that usually is not the case. There's no music involved, anything. You have to be all the characters, if there are any. You have to create the setting. You have to create the texture, the whole thing with your voice, right? It's all about that acting. You're acting, you just don't have the benefit of the pretty pictures behind you. And so that makes it even more difficult, because you're everything. You don't have, trees behind you, You know what I'm saying? So this is one thing, that's really the biggest thing, because I get a lot of students, and this is why I do a free 30-minute consultation
Yeah.
for any prospective students because I want to hear what they're talking about doing, right? And in a lot of cases, there'll be somebody like, well, I just retired from the post office, and I want to do something, like a second act and stuff
Yeah.
like that. And I'm like, okay, all right, that's good.
Yeah.
And so, but after I talk to them, I'm hearing they want to be more of a book reader than a narrator, and there's a big difference.
So this is just something kind of off the cuff here. I just thought that I would ask you, and people hear your voice, you hear your voice, and you do a lot of things outside of just the voiceover. But when and where were you in life when you really felt like you had found your voice?
Ooh, man. Found my voice. Oh, I can tell you. So I was back in Virginia. I used to do at the public broadcasting station, the NPR station there. I used to read for the blind. They had the service. They still have it, the radio reading service. I don't know what they call it. But really, in any state, they have this. And it's a volunteer thing. And you go in and you read for an hour or two. And it can just be newspapers, periodicals, whatever, and you're just reading, right? But as I was reading, we would do those things and fine. Sometimes I would take my wife with me. We would just read. But I started getting feedback from the people at the station. And they were like, man, the people are really like connected. Will you come in and read more? Because they really, like to hear, they feel like you help them visualize the stories. And I call it myself just reading, but I always put a little bit more into it. And so that was kind of like, that made me kind of feel like, maybe I can use my voice as a service. I started kind of recognizing your voice is more than just speaking. Like I said, using your voice as a service, using your voice as outreach, using your voice. I know voice as a service. I know, right?
No, you get what I was asking.
Yeah. And that's the thing. It's really all of that. And I did a couple of radio shows, and stuff like that. And it was always, I started doing a radio show after that, right before I left Virginia. And it was that same thing. It was like people wanted to call, they wanted to talk, they wanted to hear the music, but it turned into almost like a hybrid talk show, and it was funny because one of my friends, he was the program manager at the radio station I was just volunteering at, and he was like, yeah, man, we got to bring you on staff. These folks, they really, really like, how you reach out to them. So it was more of a thing where I was like, okay, well, I know I got a lot of friends. I'm a pretty affable guy, but now that voice is reaching out to people and making new friends.
Yeah.
And that's always the thing for me. It's like shining a light. And if I could use my voice as that light beam, then that's when I thought, maybe there is something here.
Well, that's a good transition point, because one of the things that your voice and all of that did was helped us to connect, and I don't know if it had anything with your voice, but I'm glad that we connected. We know each other from outside of this. We know each other from church, and I'm blessed to know you that way. Is there any spiritual principle or scripture that comes to mind that maybe helped you through the tougher seasons?
Oh yeah. And I tell my daughter this is something that I've been telling my daughter since she was a little baby girl going to school. Philippians 4:13. I can do all things through Christ that strengthens me, right? So that's the whole thing. When you look at it, that's it. You have to believe. Like, you got to believe that, that through, turmoil, roadblocks, negativity, self-doubt, you still got to go back to the I can, and then the I can do. I would challenge anybody watching this, go through that verse, and I know it's something that we've heard time and time again. We're just like, yeah, I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. But go through every word of that, right? Start with I can, and then add those words, and you're going to receive more and more revelation that will really, I think, kind of, provide more edification for yourself as far as understanding what that really means. And then it ends up with through Christ, right? So that's where it comes from. It really comes from. It's like, having faith in God really, I know I talked, earlier about, what made it happen, but that was the thing that it was like always kind of like standing on. When you have faith in God, it's like the rest of it is like, well, I can stand on that if nothing else. That's the business I'm standing on first. Yeah. And then everything else is built off of that. You know what I'm saying? And if you just read that, that's where the I can comes from, is from that base of building off of, your faith in God, but you gotta kind of, have that, that thing just like building a house, you have a strong, solid foundation.
You talked about the spiritual side. Earlier you mentioned the pastors of our church. I wonder what it means to you to have your own church family, people that see you in and out day to day. What does it mean to you to have those people also get to see you in that light of what you do?
Well, it really means a lot, especially with, the pastors. They have been so supportive and I mean, just enthusiastic. They have been right there with, encouragement along the way. Like I said, when I went through the cancer diagnosis, there were others who were going through that same thing with me, everybody knows me. She was also going through that same time I was. Right. And it was different, different areas. But the fact is that we were able to build an even stronger kinship. Like we have an unsaid, unspoken, like brother sisterhood, kinship that we understand. Going through that proton radiation thing and, all that kind of stuff, and then coming out on the other side as conquerors over this thing that, was, could have really been a monster, but we told that thing no, and so having them, and then of course I actually, Pastor Gregory doesn't remember this because he was an athlete back then. But actually, I went to college with him for a little bit back at Bowling Green. He was a basketball star, and I was just a little peon. So he wouldn't have paid attention to me. But the fact is that these are things, and I got to touch on this as well. The first time I went to church in this area at Faith Christian Center, he was the youth pastor up in Michigan. He was the guest speaker that day. And he was the reason I actually came back because I was like, because when he was preaching, because he and I are about the same age, when he was preaching, I was like, oh, this guy sounds like me. Yeah. And he's preaching the word, but he's coming at it like, because, I was from the hood,
he was reaching out.
And he was reaching out to me, And so I was like, okay, shoot, I can come back and get with this. And so, these relationships, these were things that were built from, I believe, long ago, just things that God put in place that along that little logic path, put in place for me to be where I am today, sitting here with you, but it means a lot to have the people, I've made so many great relationships, like yours, well, not a lot, actually exactly like yours.
I'm honored
you and
that
I
you're
are
saying
really,
that.
But through my church family, through that linked up family, they are so encouraging. Everybody is so wonderful. Some of them don't even understand exactly what it is I do, but they're like, look, if you're doing it, I'm for it. You go do it. Go forth, young man,
You have mentioned you're a cancer situation a couple of times, and you just like slid right by it.
Yeah.
Both times that you mentioned it. And I want to ask though, because they don't call it the big C for nothing.
Right.
You know, of course, we know a bigger C than that.
Yeah,
you
right,
know?
right. That's good. I like that.
You know, and so what kind of a mindset shift that you need to have to deal with that?
So that's a great question. So
Because, you know, we're called a shattered mindset.
Yeah, right.
So,
Yeah. Going into it, and it really is, like I was saying earlier, it's really all about a mindset. Once again, it goes back to having that positive mindset. You know, it's like, you know, when it's shattered, you know, you gotta, when that shattered mindset, you break it, then, you know, the pieces start coming back together. But they always, when you look at something like that, it never comes back together exactly the way it was before, right? There's always going to be something that doesn't, even though the pieces may fit together, there's always going to be some little piece in there that you know is missing or whatever, or that's open for new things to come through, right? So in this case, it was just like that. It was just positivity. I never gave it a like dying, being disabled, being, you know, any of that stuff, being disfigured, none of that stuff. I never gave it another thought. I figured, you know, this was just another, you know, speed bump along the way, and that's exactly the way I looked at it, you know. And here's the thing: is that you know, I was aggressive. I made up my mind from the beginning that I was like, I told my doctors at Emory, and I told them I had a great team. I said, look, let's be aggressive with this thing. Let's not mess around with this monster because I'm about to kill this thing. And this is like Godzilla. I don't care. I'm sending it back to the ocean, and it will never eat my Tokyo again. And so I came in, and I came in swinging. And you know, that's how Pastor Trish, I'm sure she came in the same way. You know, I came in swinging, I came in aggressive. I told them, we are going to tackle this thing. You tell me what I need to do, I will do it. And, you know, 2 years, you know, after that, this thing is going to be just a blip on the map. And that's exactly what happened. Let me tell you this too. The way this is kind of funny. You know, it's like how God works these things out. Proves God has a sense of humor. So they told me, oh man, you know, we're not sure if you're going to be able to, you know, do your voice stuff anymore. Because I mean, man, you know, because it was a neck thing, you know.
Yeah.
And so they were like, and they took out like 26 lymph nodes and you know, all kinds of stuff. I got this big zipper here, goes almost up to my ear.
Zipper.
Yeah, right. And so all that stuff. And like I said, they were amazed that I was even speaking. And so I had my surgery in December of 2020, the great year of 2020. And so by January, it was like December 8th of 2020. By January 8th of 2021, I already had an audiobook offer on the table from Simon & Schuster. And for and it wasn't a whole book, it wasn't an entire book, but it was a tandem audiobook. But I was able to get in there. I read prefaces, Hank Aaron, the whole thing. It was written by Hank Aaron. And so it was the whole thing. I did a few characters there. This was 30 days. This was less than 30 days after getting out of cancer surgery, neck surgery, okay? And I was perfectly able to do it. You know, there was nothing. I got in there. I recorded it. There was no problems. In fact, I did 2 books before, and then I started radiation therapy, which is all I ever had to have. I didn't have to have chemo or nothing like that. That was just for a few weeks. But it was just like, so my point is that all that stuff, it happened, but it was just another episode in my life. And it was a short chapter, turned the page, and, you know, it was just like I was just back on. Just to give you a perspective, I had to do 6 weeks of radiation therapy every day, right downtown here. And a week after I finished therapy, I went to Hawaii.
Okay.
You know what I'm saying? Because it
Wow.
was like
Wow.
I was not going to let that define me or diminish me
That's
in
outstanding.
any way. And I'll tell you where I got the lesson. The lesson from that I got from my mother. My mother had breast cancer back in the early 80s, 1982, which was kind of like prehistoric days when it came to cancer, right? So she, went through the surgery and everything, but then she said she came home. She didn't have to do chemo or radiation, nothing, right? And she told me that she just stayed positive through the whole thing. And because there's power in positive thinking, there really is.
Yeah.
And here's what she said. She said, yep, she said, you know what? I got home, I healed up, I woke up the next day, I put on my lipstick and my makeup, and I was Marie again.
See there?
And I always remember that when that happened to me, I was like, you know what? I didn't get them put on makeup and lipstick and that like that. But but you know what? But that always stuck with me because my mom was gone by then.
Yeah.
But by the same token, that always stuck with me. How she dealt with that.
Yeah.
Right? How she dealt with that. That's the observation, paying attention, taking bits and pieces from other people's lives and, pasting them on you, little sticky notes,
Right.
pasting them into your persona can kind of help you later on in life when you're handling these situations. So, and she never had any other nothing. She didn't have to go back for anything. Never had a complication from that.
That's so good.
When she passed away, it wasn't from cancer or anything like that. And so I saw that and I lived that. So I didn't give it a second thought.
So, you just turned the page, and I like that. You turned the page and you went to another episode, which brings me to ask you, what's ahead for you, in terms of turning the page and other episode? What, is there a role, a project, a kind of book that you haven't, had an opportunity to read yet? What's ahead?
Well, when you say episodes, that's a great transition. Right now, my new venture, Loud Brown Audio Podcast Network. We are chocolate covered, entertaining, and habit forming. With all due respect to my man George Clinton, we just released our first podcast on the network. It is an adaptation of a book that was originally released as an audiobook sometimes I help authors or independent publishing companies, turn books into audiobooks for authors. And in many cases, the authors want to narrate. Sometimes I don't let them. But the fact is that in many cases with me, they're directing, I can, bring it out of them. So this is one case, author Shelley Hawk wrote Scarface the Valiant some years ago, and they did a great job narrating it. But we decided, we're going to take this thing to the next level. We're going to do a multi-cast, dramatic, episodic podcast on this thing. And we just released episode 1. It's available now on Spotify, Apple podcasts, and I'm sure other places too now. But it's a great thing there. So we're looking. That's our first one. Give it a listen. It's only about 25 minutes long. You're going to love it. Episode 2 will be coming out soon. But it's things like that. So that's the start. So we already have another show right now that we're producing. That's coming out called Torn Between by another local writer here, Nigel Williams Green, that's going to be released here as well. But these episodic like audio drama podcasts, and they're going to be different genres, like they're going to be kids and family, sci-fi, different things like that. But it's really, it's a good, way to concentrate on, voices and writers of color to allow folks who may not be recognized yet on a bigger stage to help them kind of bring their stories to life. So Loud Brown Audio Podcast Network, we are out there. We are live now. Still working Voice Visions Audio, which is my audiobook production side of things.
Okay.
So I've got a couple of books out. One recently released, which actually written by one of my homies, Dwayne Hickman. He's a lawyer, former military guy in Florida, and he and I literally grew up and walked the same streets, went to junior high school together. But he went on to do some really amazing things, and he wrote about it, wrote a couple of books. I just got done narrating the second book in that series, so that's going to come out. The one that's out now is called Journey of a Soldier, Memoirs of a Kid from Akron, kid with 2 Ds, so there's no confusion there with somebody else, LeBron James, hint, hint, who's the kid from Akron. and also under Lamarr Gulley VO voiceover, I work with, the big 5 publishers. We just Simon and Schuster, I'm doing a series with them, the chicken soup from the for the soul.
Yeah.
So I'm doing currently narrating in the studio now, narrating the second in a series for them for that. So those are always fun. It's this one. The last one was more of a comedic read. This one is more of a spiritual read.
Okay.
And it's fun, and they pay me. So
that's
always
helps.
a lot of fun.
So last thing for as we wrap this and wind it down, for somebody listening right now or watching who maybe feels like their gift is buried in self-doubt and so forth now, what would you tell them?
Ooh, I would say self-doubt. I would say let that, try your best to let that go, right? And how do you do that? See what, here's one thing that I tell my students. Okay, ask 3 to 5 people to write down 3 things that come to mind when they think about you. Now, I tell people to come to mind, when they hear your voice, for my students, but 3 things that come to mind when they think about you. And I just have to say this, just from being, the guy I am, if you don't have a relationship with Christ, my goodness, and I'm not preaching to you and nothing like that, but just find a way, find a way to dig in there. If you had some church hurt or something, there's something out there for you somewhere. Even if it's just like YouTube or talking to a friend who is in church or whatever, find your way into that word, because there is so much positivity within that word. So many great examples from Abraham to Isaac, Jacob, all these great business people, Solomon, all these great business people who can show you can take different examples from as well, right? So it's you have to do a little bit of research, but the thing is that it's positioning yourself. Get out there, meet people, get beyond that fear of talking to folks, even if it's just joining an online conference or something like that with a lot of people. You don't even have to say anything in a lot of cases, but just being there, letting your name be seen in a lot of different areas, or events and stuff like that. But the idea, though, is to get out of your box and allow yourself to interact with others, because that's the whole thing. Interacting with other people is going to tell you a lot about who you are and how you react to situations.
Okay.
And you're going to learn not just from the people, but you're going to learn from how you react to those situations. Whether you want to do more of that, whether you don't want to do anything of that. But the thing is that you stop being so harsh on yourself. You got to remember, life is short. We only have a few years here, and you want to make them happy, So the idea is go out there, take that chance, take that step, take that trip, that open that business, go on that venture, take that chance. Don't put yourself in a bad position, but take a chance on doing something. Join, or here's another thing as well. Get away from what it is that you're doubting yourself on. So, for example, one of the things I love doing is cooking. I feel like I'm a chef. I could get out here and open a restaurant, y'all. I'm serious.
Okay,
I can burn, right?
I'm gonna have to ask Miss Karen.
Yeah. Oh, you ask her. She'll tell you now. She'll back it. But yeah, like baking, cooking and stuff like that. So that gets me away from it a little bit, right? But it helps me to know that, okay, look, I'm very capable in this area here. And it kind of like lets you know that, yes, there is something that I do well. So why wouldn't I do this other thing well? It's like I'm very capable. I guess with me, it comes back to what you talk about all the time and what we've talked about in the past. It's about that mindset. And that's something that like I, always commended and I always have admired about you and your wife is that mindset of getting it done, whether you're working as a team or you're working individually, which you're always working at as a team anyway. But the thing is that, you guys, as I was saying earlier, you're a powerhouse, whether you're together or apart, but it's like you have that mindset of, and it goes back to the old Obama thing. Yes, I can, yes, we can. You have to think yes and amen, keep that in your spirit. Really, really put that in there.
Yeah, man. Thank you. I appreciate that. And I appreciate you. And I appreciate you taking this time with me.
No problem. I appreciate you inviting me. I mean, really is an honor to be here with you, man. I mean, you're a great friend, a great guy, and even better man. And I really appreciate the guy that you are and the example that you've set for me and a lot of other young folks.
There you go.
Area.
There you go, man. I appreciate it. Well, hey, listen. Any other last words before we wrap up then?
Nope. Just hey, if anybody wants to follow me online, I'm on Instagram at Lamarr Gulley VO as in voiceover. Facebook Lamarr Gulley or Lamarr Gulley voiceover or Voice Visions audio. Loud Brown audio is also out there on Instagram, and also Scarface the Valiant episode 1 is now available on iTunes and Spotify. Go out there and support us and give us a listen.
No doubt about it. Hey, listen, thank you again, my friend.
All right,
I appreciate you very much.
It's an honor.
So, hey, listen, folks, we're going to call it this one. Until the next time, keep adapting, keep adjusting, and keep reaching for those new horizons. And we'll see you the next time on the Shattered Mindset Podcast. Take care. Take charge. God bless.